Welcome to the Sustainability Sherpa, your expert guide through the global ESG landscape.
A warm welcome to all the people who are joining us on this podcast today. Before I start off with our first episode, I would like to give a brief background about this whole concept of the Sustainability Sherpa podcast series. During the last 7-8 years that I have been in the sustainability environment, I have been gradually seeing sustainability becoming a more and more important topic within enterprises and corporations. But the fact is that to drive this important topic, this strategic pillar, there's always this bunch of people who we call the sustainability practitioner or the sustainability champion. And this gentleman or lady is looking for advice, inputs, guidance from their fellow tribes people. Because if you think of it, compared to any other strategic pillar in an organization, sustainability is relatively new. There are no footprints of that strategy or those execution marks within an organization. So, in a way, the person who's driving this is a kind of a pioneer. So, we thought, let's start this series called the Sustainability Sherpa, where I will get some very interesting and more importantly, knowledgeable, been there, very well done that kind of people to guide fellow professionals like us on their sustainability journey. So today I am very, very proud, very delighted that for the very first episode, we have possibly the best Sherpa for sustainability in India today. If I may say, as a practitioner, if you are going to be the Edmund Hillary, I would define my guest today as Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, the pioneer who helped climb the Mount Everest. I am referring to none other than our delightful guest today, Professor Dr. Prasad Modak. I'll give you a brief background, and as I was telling him before we started this, anything about Prasad Modak ji to give a brief background is a little difficult. But Professor finished his Masters in Environment Science and Engineering in the year 1980. Then in 1980 to 84, he was at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, where he did his doctorate. Then in the Orwellian year of 1984, he kind of returned back to his alma mater and joined the IIT Bombay Environmental Science Center. And then within a very short period, and I think that must have been at a very young age, and in those days a pioneering effort, he started EMC, the organization, in 1986. So as we speak, EMC is just shy of being 30 years old. Think of any United Nations multilateral or bilateral agency or body. Professor Modak has been there, done that. He's been part of many, many august think tanks, and a lot of the work which we are executing today has been laid the groundstones of by Professor Modak. He's also advised major governments right from Egypt to our utmost east to Vietnam, Thailand, and of course many departments and state governments in India as well. He's published multiple books with both the United Nations and the Oxford Press, which incidentally have been translated into multiple different languages including Japanese. He's worked with ADB, World Bank, UNEP. But I'll just keep this brief. I would request all of you to visit his LinkedIn profile, and you will find it the most delightful and expert in our domain kind of thing. So I've decided to call our first episode of the Sustainability Sherpa. The title is From Science to Strategy, Professor Prasad Modak on Guiding India's Sustainability Journey. So Professor, my first question to you, when you started in this field many, many decades ago, what was it that drove you to a subject called environment science? I'm sure it was not so popular at IIT Bombay at that point in time.
Very true. I don't think environmental engineering was really a choice. In IIT Bombay also, it was when I recall when I was a student, this subject wasn't being talked much about, and of course we did have electives, but in a sense I would say, Jangoo, because my family background, that most of us in my family have done their careers in this field of environment. That was one prompt for me. And second, the subject itself was so exciting, where you find that you are having a confluence of science and society. I think that's something which was very exciting for me to take the career head on. And that's how I landed, doing my master's and PhD in environmental engineering.
So over the years, Professor, how has your thinking and communication with stakeholders evolved from being purely technical, science-based, science-oriented, to kind of move on to systems thinking and then towards shaping enterprise strategies, government strategies, stakeholder strategies?
Yeah, right. No, it's something. It has been really more of a organic process, as I was working more in the practice at the same time, at touch points with the policymakers. I realized that if you really want to bring in a change, uh, take an example of even resources security or resource conservation, resource recycling as a core, for example, and the whole interest to minimize the adverse impacts to the environment, but of course at the same time ensuring our economic growth. I think this challenge made me understand that the solution, or I would say, science is not just the silver bullet to solve this problem. And you got to expand and understand the nexus. And this nexus will only come up only when you start understanding the system as a whole and their interconnections. Environment being such a complex subject, and more as we understand even the case of impact of climate change, there's a huge complexity in understanding the kinds of impacts that it would produce. The second thing I would say, Jangoo, that I also realized that most of our thinking towards environment or sustainability for that matter is to be as much risk averse as possible. But the opportunities that this subject gives in leveraging is amazing. And therefore, I would love to use the word that this is an area not to make profits, which of course one can, but it's more towards prosperity. And this broad dimension of sustainability, for me at least, in growing in this area, was both exciting and challenging, and I've been enjoying every bit of that journey so far.
So what I'm hearing you say, Professor, is that what you liked was the marriage of science and society, and how you can take that marriage to reap the child of prosperity.
Absolutely well said. Absolutely well said. I should remember the way you said just now in my next interview. But this is the way. Absolutely, we have to look at prosperity. Yeah.
No, thank you. And so, sir, Professor, you've been at it for almost 30 plus years now, and you've seen it all, right? Are you seeing a gradual shift or an acceleration in the last few years, or you think it's been a similar journey, a steady curve or an accelerating curve? What's your view on the curve of sustainability, environment maturity over the last 3 decades?
Yeah. So you're right. It has been a gradual process. Mostly in the beginning, we were looking at environmental protection and solution as compliance and enforcement. But then soon people started getting an understanding that going beyond compliance, in fact, starts making a business sense. Going beyond compliance has to be also stimulated by regulations. So that is something which I would say happened more in the period of 80s, in specifically that decade. But then the next step, people realize that you need a structure, and the whole term triple bottom line, which was coined, by John Elkington, that took traction. When we say the triple bottom line is economic, environmental, and social. But I think I would say the real push we saw after 90s, mainly from the financial institutions. The role played today by the development financing institutions like the World Bank or Asian Development Bank, several others, is to try to elevate the governance more and more towards global standards. And this globalization of environmental and social standards as imperatives for investing, I think that brought a huge impact on the different way of thinking. And the investor community, when they got together to start sharing common principles and performance standards, then of course the business had to respond by adopting these frameworks. And I think soon people realized that adopting these frameworks was not just limited to checkbox, like a checklist, but there's a huge advantage if you decipher sustainability into a very interesting strategy for the business to be future ready and resilient. I would call that last part in you'll see a huge change in the last 5 years, more so because the financing opportunities have come up and the whole subject of sustainable finance has come up, which is giving totally a different shape to the policymakers as well as the businesses and the financial institutions. I expect to play a much more role as much as the regulators.
No, absolutely agree with you, sir. Thank you for kind of summarizing the sustainability journey of not just India but the globe over the last 3 decades as you saw it. Compared to you, sir, my journey has been relatively short, just about a decade or so. But I agree with you that over the last 5 years, the traction and the curve in terms of ESG adoption, especially in the space I work in, which is corporates and enterprises, is really ramping up. And I think there are a couple of stakeholders who are driving this. One is, of course, the investor community. But more and more global supply chains are becoming very conscious of whom they buy from, what they buy, how it is produced, and more important, the resilience and risk proofness, the concept which you mentioned. I think what I am seeing, and you echoed that very well as well, is that ESG is now moving from something which was termed as good to do or good to have to become a must have. And when that happens in the C suite, I think levers start moving, isn't it? That brings me to my next question. I always, every time I meet you, I always have delightful conversations. But I always think to myself, here's Professor Prasad Modak. He wears different hats at different times of the day or even hours of the day, where sometimes he is meeting with policymakers, government agencies who have a different way of thinking. And then next moment or the very next appointment might be with a corporate CEO. Now, do you think there are any nuances, differences between these two kind of stakeholders think and act, and how do you adapt or appeal to these different people?
Sure, sure. In fact, the the wide canvas of people I keep meeting or are playing roles just tells me that each one has a different perspective. You mentioned ESG, so let me use that as a way to compare. And each one looks at this very subject of ESG in a different perspective. So for a corporate, I'll categorize in the corporate again people who look at ESG as just like a scorecard. Some of them fancy that once their rating goes up, their valuation will go up. So they look at ESG as a must, like you said, to add a flavor to their business canvas. And they want to say we also are having an ESG roadmap and a policy. There's another set of corporates I have been meeting who not only understand its importance in the business context, but they look at it that this is a good framework, first of all, to practice sustainability and to penetrate across the organization, be it anyone in different departments, even including supply chain, the value proposition of sustainability. And so the conversations don't limit only to the boardrooms or in the disclosure reports, but you see sustainability being looked at every point, every department, every individual is somehow connecting between the business that they're engaged in and the overall canvas of sustainability. You know, the most difficult part, Jangu, is understanding and appreciating sustainability is one part, but willingness to do behavioral change, to play a role, is so difficult. I'm sure you must have also observed a lot of talk and less of walk. And I therefore will categorize a third category here of people who greenwash essentially, and they are not really representing a true transformation of their organization, from the sustainability perspective. The investors look at ESG and such frameworks to guard themselves from risk, financial risk and reputation risk. But they never look at this lens as something they can use to see opportunities. So we find a very different, narrow perspective of ESG coming from the investors. The government, if you see on the other hand, is a little bit fragmented when it comes to E, S, and G. If you look at the canvas in Government of India today, Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change looks at E. Then you would see the Ministry of Social Affairs is looking at S, and any land-related issues are also addressed there. And for the governance, you have Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So now there's no one single body which will pull together E, S, and G. And that's the opportunity for consultants like you and me to come and bring everything together and connect it and build a big picture. But that's true in all countries. There's a fragmentation when it comes to, how do you take ESG agenda across all the stakeholders. But you are very right. As I keep meeting people from different walks and try playing different roles, each one has a totally different perspective of the same. So it's like elephant in the room, I would say, Jangoo. It's something like that.
Actually, in more ways than one, if I may use a small pun, ESG is the new elephant in the room. If we pun on it a bit, and at the same time, it's a very perception oriented thing on how people look at it. Professor Modak, one of the things I think our viewers, listeners would like to have is your perspective of having traversed different countries, advised them, and also been on UN bodies. Do you see any variances in the way the Western world looks at it, as the way the global South, as it's now called, looks at it? Are there any nuances, differences?
Yes, yes, they are. And I would put it literally differentiating are the areas of S, the social perspective, and each sovereign country looks at social elements differently. Environment seems to be an area which is commonly understood, and the governance is, of course, prerogative of every national government how they look at governance. Although there are some fundamental guiding principles universally adopted when it comes to corporate governance or governance as a subject by itself. But over the last, I would say, 2-3 decades, there is a significant effort happening on harmonization. And what I call sometimes the word country systems are getting aligned to global standards, environmental and social standards. Well, there is a differential between what you see in the developed countries, their understanding of the frameworks or global standards, and what they would like to see, and those from the developing world. Because realize that, both these, let's say if I were to divide the world into these two halves, there are different points of economic growth. And then you can't apply the same yardstick at the moment to transition economies, what probably have been developed in the developed countries. So there is going to be a differential. It has to be respected also. And you can't really impose one single global environmental social standard, because after all, and this is the important point I want to make, that sustainability is always contextual. And this is the important prefix I always put, that you must say not sustainability, but contextual sustainability. And that's important to be kept, so that you then not only understand the differential, but I would even go a step further and respect that differential. Yeah.
Professor, whenever I've spoken to you or read your work, I've always come across this concept of system thinking when it comes to environment sustainability. In fact, I was just observing that in our last 20-30 minutes also you brought that up twice. So it's obviously a core way of how you think and practice environment and sustainability. For a ESG practitioner, can you in a few sentences explain how he or she, when she works within the confines of an enterprise or an organization, how can he or she adopt this talisman of system thinking, which has been a cornerstone of your success?
Yes. Let me put it in this perspective. So, most of the entrants in the ESG profession today, sometimes I say it in a sense of humor, that they are good users of Microsoft Excel. What happens is that we are understanding ESG in a parametric fashion, full of indicators and data. And most of the professionals, when they work on the data, I would say massage and manipulate that data, try to derive indicators and then structure the overall organization's ESG performance. They are not really actually having a thorough knowledge of the subject, and I would insist that subject being to be used as a core of impact assessment. Well, I'll prefix this can be risk stroke impact assessment, but that's a skill and training, according to me, every ESG practitioner must have. Now, when I say impact assessment, it widens immediately towards systems thinking, because it is that field where you start visualizing all possible activities due to any developmental project, and you understand environment into multiple components, and you start looking at the relationship between activities and components. And it's not that the activities only impact the component, but even the component impacts another component. For example, if I have an example of an activity that I'm having vehicles moving on the road, they generate vehicular emissions. These emissions lead to deterioration in the air quality. You and I breathe that deteriorated air quality, that affects our health. So it is a cascading impact. And only when you open up and understand these linkages, you probably reach closer to appreciating the system. And more than that, when you go into more details, you realize the nexus. And that nexus is so vital to understand how one thing depends on another, and the changes are sometimes unpredictable if you really have poorly described your system. So that's the core, according to me, because if you know impact assessment, then you can do a good life cycle assessment. You can do a technology assessment. You can do a product assessment. The same tool of impact assessment is all pervasive. It goes everywhere. And it doesn't distinguish between environmental and social. It itself produces an integrated approach. So my thinking is that no ESG practitioner should practice ESG without a proper certified course on environmental and social impact assessment. And if I find in my profession, my network, I do see youngsters coming and talking to me to discuss sustainability, where, as I said earlier, they are very good in Excel, but they don't even know anything about the basics of impact assessment. So that's my recommendation, Jangoo, for the young people who want to enter in this field. Well, they can do well for a while, but without any solid ground in impact assessment, they just can't move on in their careers.
No, absolutely so true, sir. I think people kind of underestimate the foundational science and engineering, at least the basics that you need to have understanding of if you want to be successful in this field. And those are the hard skills. If I may add to what you just said, what I would add to a young practitioner who's starting is some of the soft skills as well. I think ESG by its very sense, whether you're doing impact assessment or a risk assessment or touching each of these pillars, it touches almost every part of the organization. No part of the organization is left out. So even if you have the best scientific base and engineering knowledge, which is a must, or at least a working knowledge of the same, I think the soft skills of communication, collaboration, and teamwork are extremely important. And I think, as you mentioned, it's an emerging field, everybody's seeing it differently. So I would think collaboration and communication, the two C's, in terms of soft skills, become extremely important, because unless you can charge people up, get them kind of thinking about the same mantra, get as passionate about this subject as you are, you're not going to get collaboration. And I think to some extent, the practitioner's life is little easy today, because the tone from the top has started to be very supportive of this kind of strategic pillar of ESG working across the organization. We have seen it in a lot of our client engagements over the last couple of years, where the CEO, the C-suite really drives some of these decisions. Again, keeping with the tone of this practitioner, picking up on your wisdom of so many years, are there, like, over the years, some habits, hacks, practices that you have developed? Book reading, practices, or what are some of the things which have influenced you and made you who you are? And if people could pick up even a few of those pointers, I think they'll serve to be good sustainability Sherpas.
So you already talked about book reading, yes, of course. But we got to really read the right kind of books, essential books. And I've been writing blogs on which books one should read, and I'll be happy to share a link to those blogs, where there are many books which at least influence my life, my professional life. I don't see the habit of creating a library anymore. All you have to do is just go to the infinite world of internet, Google, and now you have chat GPTs, right? So I think probably we are in that generation who took pride in possessing the books, and even now in my office I have a library. People tell me, why are you wasting your office space for a library? And that's sad part of it, that the young people don't understand the value of reading books. But the second, another thing, missing point, which I think scored to my advantage, is that I went literally all over, for example, in this country, and met people who I thought were inspiring to me. They were my lighthouses. And I made a lot of effort to physically go travel, take their time and meet with them. And those conversations have been extremely useful to me. It shaped me a lot. And the same thing I did internationally whenever I have been traveling different countries. I could develop my own networks. And not just for a while, but for so many years, we keep connecting. This Sunday I had a call with my friend in the United States who is 87 years old and still active, and we were recounting our days together where we worked and enjoyed those assignments. So definitely traveling, meeting people, networking, I would give a lot of value, which many people in younger days, age, don't do that. And the last point, which I find also, I think I'm sure you'll agree with me here, that there is a fair amount of virtual interaction, but not participating in associations. You'll be surprised when I ask this question, that in India, is there a strong body of sustainability professionals? And the younger, professional comes to me and ask him, can you spot a place where you can join, become a member, get involved, organize seminars, conferences? And they say, no, we have a WhatsApp group kind of a thing. That's the answer. But, in early days when I was involved, and I got not only in working with associations, but I was fortunate to be a founder of some of these associations. And the power of these associations is something which I think the younger generation is missing. And I would really like them to consider coming together for some important national agendas and be represented in some of the committees. Ministries have been sitting for stakeholder consultation. So this third part, this urge to be working for an association is very, very important. I would strongly advise, therefore, book reading is one part, but right kind of books, going around and meeting and talking to people, be a good listener essentially, and then network, and be a part of a association or even start an association to have a platform for you to grow and also contribute, obviously, through the members of the associations. And that is something I feel should be looked at by the younger generation.
No, very well put, sir. Curiosity, which whets your appetite by reading, meeting people, networking. And I think the last point which you mentioned, as you were saying, I was thinking, for an ESG practitioner, one needn't wait for the national stage to arrive. Even in your own organization, you could start a ESG club, a sustainability corner, or Friday afternoon meeting where you meet over a cup of coffee and discuss things. And very soon, these things, have take a life of their own and can blossom and bloom into something larger.
Absolutely.
From company
Yeah,
to industry to
correct.
geography.
I expand a bit, Jangu, to what you said. Don't do only for your organization, but to the community where you're living. And that is the real, a way that you give back to the society in some sense. And, be a champion, therefore, not only in your organization, but in your neighborhood. I think that you mentioned earlier communication as an important element in sustainability, and that's where one learns that how do you communicate, how do you take the message on sustainability to your colleagues in the office, but also to your neighborhood, the neighborhood community.
Professor, before I wind this session up, I would be amiss if I didn't ask you this question. So you've seen it all and you continue to keep chugging. You are an inspiration, and actually I would say you're the kryptonite who gives energy to sustainability professionals like myself. Is there anything, one thing which worries you? We hear a lot when you talk climate and sustainability. There's a lot of doom talk, but you always come across as a very positive person as well. But is there something which worries you, and at the same time something which gives you hope that yes, we will do right by the planet and then get the profits and prosperity out of it?
True. If you look at the crisis we are all going through today, it doesn't give you a chance to have any hope. That's one part of it. But like as I always say, there is always going to be a sunrise every day, and maybe the nights get longer, but there is a sunrise. So that's the reason of hope that something surely will happen. But I think if you ask me what worries me, is the needle is moving faster on policies and commitments and declarations. While the needle is moving faster, the capacities are not getting built for delivery. You'll be surprised that when I take a look into the academic institutions in this country and overseas, this subject is still not yet well taught. Sometimes it's just not there. But that takes you to another worrisome factor, that you don't even sometimes have good faculty to teach this subject. Uh, Sustainability is something best taught by, I feel, professors of practice. It's not really a subject which can be best handled by someone who is not connected to the world outside. That's my belief. That's where we probably have a challenge. We don't have yet sustainability rooted in the curriculum. We have a challenge on the side of the faculty. We do not still have many continuing education programs for people to get skilled in sustainability. But the needle is moving fast at the top, and you find every other year, sometimes every year, new regulations, new policy instruments. And all this is crowding, in fact, so much for the business and the government and the communities. The people sometimes take quite a while to understand what's happening. So that's going on one side, and there's a complete disrespect and apathy at the ground level. That's the challenge, and that distance between the two, which is getting widened, is what I get worried about.
No, you're absolutely right, Professor. The needle is moving and it's moving faster by the day. And there is a dearth of capacity, whether it's at the government level, community level, corporate enterprise level. And I think that was one of the inspirations to start this podcast, the Sustainability Sherpa. So people can listen, view to inspirational folks like you, and hopefully some capacity will organically come up. But nonetheless, institutions also have to keep moving up. And I think corporates, because at the end of the day, capitalism is here to stay. And these are the people who can really move the needle on capacities, both internally, within the organizations, in the communities, in academia, can also play a great role. Professor, I'll just end this talk by thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
It's
Same
been
to
a
you.
delight.
Thank you so much
And
for this conversation, and you done really well. It was just as usual whenever we meet and discuss. It was just to me the same thing. So thank you so much, Jangoo, for this opportunity, and I wish you well for your series of your Sherpa series, and I'm sure that people who would follow this series will get much better understanding, and more than in understanding, there'll be, I think you'll be inspiring a lot of people to contribute in this very important area of sustainability. Thank you once again.
thank you, Professor, and to all the friends who are listening and watching this. I hope our last 30-40 minute discussion kindles some thoughts in you, inspires you to make contributions in whichever way of life, area of life that you are working in, whether it's an enterprise, corporate, community. Do stay tuned in for more and more insightful sessions, and I would absolutely encourage you to visit Professor Modak's blogs and his LinkedIn site, but more important, his blogs. I regularly visit them, and they are a treasure trove of information in one place. Good day, everybody, and thank you, Professor, once again.
Thank you.